I wonder if you agree with the senator's assessment.
Hi, Kaylee. Great to be back. The senator's absolutely correct from a broad macroeconomic perspective, right? The fact that we are an oil exporter means that if we were to see a sudden rise in oil prices, from the perspective of our whole economy, the impact would be less than if we were a big net importer. So our companies, our investors, our industries that employ people producing energy, their value would go up. So it is true at the economic standpoint, broadly. However, as the senator well knows, from the perspective of a voting motorist going to the pump to pay for gasoline, there being a net exporter doesn't help us too much in terms of insulating that consumer from the pump price implications of a crude oil price spike. So it's a bit of a mixed story, but he's correct at the broad economic GDP level.
Okay, so if you were advising this president, as you've advised presidents in the past, Bob, about the implications that taking military action could have for energy specifically, what would you be telling him? How should he be calibrating his moves here with that consideration in mind?
Well, I think the first thing is he has to understand, the president has to understand, there are no quick and easy solutions here. The SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, even if it was full, which it is not, unfortunately, could not offset the loss of Hormuz. That when we think about taking on Iran, it has the capability to disrupt that 20 million barrels a day of crude and some refined products, 20% of LNG, for longer perhaps than people think. It's not going to be the first Gulf War. It's not going to be the second Gulf War when it was over in a few hours to days. It's not going to be nabbing Maduro or even the 12-day war. And so it's the most serious kind of risk you can run. That being said, to be fair, if we defang Iran and we achieve our goals with Iran and Iran is neutralized, the benefits from an energy security standpoint, economic standpoint, and terrorism and security standpoint are enormous. So I would be telling him enormous risks, enormous rewards, and I would be suggesting the priority militarily ought to be to suppress Iran's still intact inventory of mines, missiles, drones, boats, submarines, and other things that could stretch out that interruption of Hormuz, because that is what's really going to hurt the global economy and the U.S. economy if Iran can shut down that waterway.
Well, and so that's when the other Gulf states and other OPEC producers come in here, Bob, because it's not just about a risk-reward calculation for the United States, but our allies in this region as well, who might be worried, what if Iran comes for our infrastructure, actually takes out our capacity for a significant period of time, our ability to actually not just move this stuff through the Strait of Hormuz, but originate it in our countries?
Absolutely. They do not want to see a conventional war, wide-scale war in their region. Look, Saudi Arabia, it suffered about as close a call as you could have in September of 2019 when Iran attacked not only the most important Saudi infrastructure, arguably the most important energy or even economic facility on the planet, the Abqaiq stabilization plant. Now, Iran chose back then to just show what it could do. It didn't destroy it. So Saudi Arabia, UAE, other countries are very vulnerable. So is Iran. If this conflict spreads to attacking each other's above ground energy infrastructure. Kaylee, got to be careful with predictions. I'm thinking that's less likely. Saudi Arabia is in a better place with Iran right now. If Iran were to inflict catastrophic damage on Saudi or other facilities, I think the response would be the ending of the Iranian regime. So it would only be something they do in extreme dire straits. It'd probably be the last thing the Iranians did. And so I think the focus will be on raising the price of oil to try to back President Trump off temporarily. And you do that by just stopping the flow through Hormuz, because that's something you can start again once the conflict's over.
Okay, so how far in terms of raising the price of oil realistically do you think we could see in this scenario, Bob? Because right now I'm looking at Brent crude, $72 a barrel. Are we talking triple digits once again? Are we talking 90? Do you have a sense?
Yeah, I think on the outbreak of conflict, should that happen, I think we're probably going up another $3 to $5 a barrel easily. We've been telling clients for some time now there's a 75% probability of military escalation. As you mentioned, there's a good $5 to $10 in the price right now, more betting in the options markets. So, but we think we have a ways to go. So it's probably up 3 to 5. You know, Kaylee, I can actually see a relief drop in oil prices as the conflict extends, because the market may think, oh, wait a minute, when the U.S. shoots at an adversary in the Gulf, it wins within hours to days. I hear over and over, oh, the U.S. is going to clean up the Strait of Hormuz in days. I think that's mistaken. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a spike and then a reversal. But I think if Iran chose, and our military advisors tell us, if Iran chose to make the Hormuz Strait unsafe, it could do so for weeks. It's sort of like back in April when the Houthis absorbed 52 days of pummeling by the U.S. military, right, and we did not stop them from making Bab el-Mandab unsafe. Iran has much better weaponry, better coastline than the Houthis. So I can almost see spikes and reversals here. And if it gets to a prolonged Hormuz disruption, well over $100 a barrel, it'll have to cause demand destruction through economic downturn.
Wow, that's incredible to consider. Bob, it's so valuable to have you weighing in on this potential conflict. But I also want to ask you about some other areas as well, as, of course, we're seeing another escalation and at the very least rhetoric around our relationship with Cuba. And, of course, the U.S. Playing a more active role now in choking off Cuban supplies, including that of energy. Bloomberg is now out with a story that's just crossed a red headline on the Bloomberg terminal about the Trump administration aiming to make Cuba more dependent on the United States for supplies. Apparently, this plan would include reassuring energy companies that they can sell oil and fuel to Cuban businesses, and authorizing the resale of Venezuelan oil to Cuba under certain conditions. I know you're hearing this news just as it's breaking, and I'm reading it to you, Bob, but I wonder if you have a thought as to whether or not Cuba can actually become a real market for American energy, what this would entail.
Absolutely. No, I think the Trump administration, it began with Venezuela, but I think its vision of ejecting foreign influence, adversarial influence in our hemisphere, and confronting and defeating regimes in the region that are hostile to the United States is underway, and Cuba's probably next after Venezuela. That being said, I don't think you're going to see as an aggressive approach to Cuba as you do with Venezuela. I don't think the administration, Marco Rubio, the president, want to cause a humanitarian crisis in Cuba. In some ways, it's even more vulnerable than many other countries in the region. So I think, and the Russians are sending a boat there. I don't think we want to have another Cuban crisis with Russia. So I don't think we're necessarily in a huge hurry. And I think they're going to be toggling things and calibrating pressure and inducements. But I think they see that the trend is toward pushing Cuba to come closer to the United States. And so I think that maybe is reflected in this sort of balanced policy and balanced announcement you're seeing.
Well, and of course, Venezuela is tied into this as well. And you mentioned it, Bob. What role is the Venezuelan oil that the U.S. is now selling playing in the global market right now? What kind of a factor is it?
You know, it's a big factor, but for a small part of the market. If you're a complex refiner and you love to slurp, if you will, to consume Venezuela's gunky, heavy, sulfurous, poisonous oil, you'll love it. It's a huge deal because you couldn't get this really. It was all going to China. So if you're a Chinese competitor with the United States refiner, you're not happy. If you're a U.S. refiner that likes this stuff, your Christmas just keeps on rolling on for you. It's wonderful. But the overall volumes measured in the hundreds of thousands of barrels a day are a drop in the bucket in the broader global oil market. What's happening in Iran is much more important. What's happening in Russia is much more important than's happening in Venezuela in terms of the broad market. It's more of a niche of the market, this supply and demand for this very heavy sulfurous crude.